am an atheist, in fact.
What are your views?
My views, because I just joined. I don't know the subject you were discussing.
Right? You. What are your views? I'm old enough to be your father.
No, I don't think so. I'm old, sir, but my views is
You're
I'm an atheist.
You're done.
Socrates, did you have any questions about Socrates or Plato or Aristotle today? If so, you may ask 3 questions. The first must be the same as the last.
Not really. I don't have any questions about the Socrates or the ancient Greek philosophers at this point. I cannot.
That is the correct answer.
Yeah. So what you were guys arguing about? About religion? About the?
You wouldn't understand.
You're an atheist, so I don't think you would very much understand. We were talking about the putrefying and degradation of art in all of its forms.
Okay.
Promotion of ugliness and the repugnant at the expense of the beautiful.
Who is doing that? Who is doing that? If you don't mind me asking.
The modern atheist, liberal type artist.
Yeah, I would like to call them more liberal than atheists. Yes, this is the kind of woke liberal type of cult. Yes.
But Socrates. I mean, when you see this kind of stuff, even the Bible says that even the Gentiles have the law in their hearts, and so you must recognize that there is a significant decline in the quality of art.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Today.
Yes, totally agree.
Okay.
Yes.
In your view, where do you get things like beauty from and value and the like?
Fundamentally, although in my worldview, I don't believe that we have ultimate meaning and value, but nevertheless, because we humans evolved consciousness, we have from this perspective we can make our we recognize beauty and value, which is part of our consciousness, our common human consciousnness.
Well, you're not recognizing anything. That's the problem. Because all you're doing is just self-referential. When you look at a piece of art, or you listen to some music, or you have an opinion on certain moral facts, really all you're doing is just doing self-reflection. You're not actually realizing anything about the world.
Yes, but we all share some common humanity, isn't that right? We have some kind of hard nature that we all humans share, and in this sense, there is something objective in humanity, whether we recognize whether in melody, in art, okay, and things that we agree because we share a common human nature.
Is that nature valuable?
Yes, it is valuable, obviously, yes.
Is it you that makes it valuable?
Our human nature, the state of this world, let's say. In what sense? Okay, I understand that I cannot account for ultimate value and meaning and all this kind of stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't any value and meaning. In fact, we know that there is value and meaning because we have consciousness in this universe. So
I mean, well, look, Hitler had different opinions on that, and then ironically, you guys are sometimes the loudest in the room when it comes to issues about equality and human dignity and value. But all you're doing, again, it just amounts to self-reflection. You're telling me what your own mind thinks. Hitler has his own mind, and he has his own beliefs.
So Socrates, what Jay Robin's pointing out is that at least when you appeal to meaning, we have a grounding for that. Whereas what
Right.
Jay Robbins pointing out is that yours is willy-nilly. I mean, Hitler's right if atheism is true. He's not right or wrong. It's just whatever he means it to be. And so at least our worldview accounts for the good and what's evil, and we can make an account for that. Whereas you're really just,
Yeah,
not able to.
I see your point, but let me give you an example. Is it let's go to health, for example. Is it an opinion that if I drink battery acid, this will harm my physical health? This
No,
is
it's not.
it's not an opinion. This is an
So
objective fact.
Well, that's a
there's two
different
issues.
kind of claim. Yeah, that's a different kind of claim than a moral claim. But go ahead, Jay Robin.
Right. I was going to say it's indisputable that if you drink battery acid, if you fill up a bathtub of battery acid and you jump in, yeah, you're gonna die. But the question here is whether or not it's right or wrong to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
So let me
Yeah.
paint that little story. And so I'm sorry, Jay Robin, I'm on caffeine right now, but let me just paint a little story about battery acid. And we've used the famous example of wine, but let's use battery acid instead. Let's say that you come home, Socrates, and you find a sweet, innocent old lady on the ground dead because she consumed poisonous battery acid that someone put in her glass of water. Now, what you'll find there is physical facts, and you could get all the physical facts you want out of that scenario. What those physical facts never will tell you was, should the person have murdered the old lady? Should the person have tricked that old lady with the battery acid in her drink? The answer is, you won't get that. You won't get anywhere near it. You couldn't, in an infinity of time, derive from those physical facts whether or not the woman should have been murdered. For that, and so you're asking the wrong question. And so there are physical facts, and then there are moral facts, right? And we can account for those moral facts, and you're not able to.
Okay.
All the atheist has at his disposal are physical facts, and that's just not enough.
Yes, but this is kind of the old is question. So why we ought to be moral? So, but that implies that we get the moral weight and the moral urgency of something from God. That is the claim, that we get that something has moral weight and urgency because it comes from God. God said so. But if you investigate that, sir, I think it's demonstrable that we get this urgency from the fact of suffering and well-being, not from God. Because if God,
this is the problem with that, though, Socrates, right? Hitler would be very unhappy if the Holocaust failed. If he was not able to establish successfully a Third Reich, Hitler would have been very unhappy with that, and that would have contributed to the decline of his well-being. So the point here is that you're going to have to go beyond just saying that this is what somebody likes and this is what somebody else prefers and this is what hurts somebody and someone else is crying and someone else is laughing. You're going to have to go beyond that because if we take that as a standard, then you can justify just about anything.
Well,
the point here is that you want to go beyond and say that these things are right or wrong, independent of your opinions.
But Jay Robin, what he's not necessarily disagreeing with that. If I heard him right, what he's saying is, maybe you're right, Jay Robin, we need to go beyond it. But what he's saying is, ours is to go to God, when he's saying he doesn't want to make that step. That maybe you're right, that we need to go beyond physical facts and opinion. But what he's saying is, why go to God? Maybe there's something else to account for this. Is that right, Socrates?
Yes, and I will give you an example that might challenge this. Let's say God said that abusing children for the fun of it is moral. We all here, we wouldn't have the urgency to follow this moral command. Why is that? Although God made this command, still we recognize something that we don't feel the same urgency to do this. And why so? Because in this case, that goes against human well-being. And I will use the word well-being more than is a better word than suffering, because suffering implies some kind of utilitarian worldview, which is utility, not really morality. But if you imply well-being is much more than utility. It starts to get a more deeper sense of the moral aspect in the word well-being.
Why?
Because even if something is even if something,
could there be a bad thing like a virus? I know COVID's favorite example. Like, what about the well-being of like disease and other things that may cause harm?
Yeah, so well-being is not very easily defined, but I will say something. I will say that even if I die in a just war, I still serve my well-being. So we see.
Why is well-being different than just saying like flourishing or something like that? Plenty of things that aren't moral flourish, like plants and weeds and all different types of things could flourish. Why is that more moral than, or yet less utilitarian than any other term?
Because of the example, because there are some moral theories that say things like, even if I die in a just war, I'm still serving well-being. What I'm trying to say is not the same as suffering and pleasure. So well-being is something, let's say, more. It's not like trivial like pleasure and suffering, or it's not that simple. So maybe I don't have. Maybe I suffer, but I learn things, and that serves my well-being. So it doesn't sound so trivial, and it might not be in certain moral philosophies.
Well, it's broader. I guess I would agree with you that it's broader than suffering or something, right? But it's still just, you still end up with just a term that is just describing some sort of physical state.
Yes, okay, it's still a physical state, but then maybe it has to do with. Okay, so why now we should care about well-being? That might be the question.
Mhm.
Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that.
Well, let me see if I can help you out, Socrates.
Yes.
Like, because we were originally talking about beauty. So, how did Socrates understand something like beauty? What did he think made something beautiful?
Yeah, something being beautiful, it relates to our consciousness. So we all agree that beauty.
No, I'm asking you about Socrates.
Socrates. Yeah, okay. So Socrates was a theist or a deist at the very.
So you don't agree. You don't
No,
agree
no,
with
no.
the way he.
I'm not disagreeing necessarily with the.
Okay.
Yeah,
Didn't he say beauty? Didn't he say beauty is things like harmony?
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
I agree with that. Yes.
Right, and like order. Right.
Yes, but that where that does.
What best explains things like that? What best explains like the order and the harmony in the world?
Yeah. So we all. It's not subjective because we don't all agree that these things are beautiful. It relates to our human nature, to our common human nature. Okay, so the same way like the battery acid harms objectively our body, the same way there are certain things that relate to our hard human nature, and that's why we think they are beautiful, that have to do with harmony and how we serve.
Do you think beauty and good, or do you think beauty, something that's beautiful, would you associate that with something good?
Yes, I will associate that with something good. Yes. If something is beautiful, yes.
Okay. So what best explains that?
Yes, explains what what is the
What if there was a being that was what we mean by good, or a being who had order within his own ontology, right? Wouldn't that explain those types of features that we observe in reality?
yes, that will explain things, but there is also then someone might say, what if God said something that is beautiful, that we all agree that we don't see this kind of beauty. So then we have another problem. We have this problem that
we could say that our intuitions are generally reliable, and there may be circumstances that we may not understand why God commands certain things or does certain things, right? But we could still explain that like at a higher level of description, right? So just because we don't understand something like doesn't mean it's not true.
Okay, yes, I agree with that. But
So what's your reason for not believing in God?
My reasons not believing God, because I don't. It's more cosmological. It's not moral.
It's not what?
It's not moral. My reasons are not moral. It are more cosmological. You know, I don't believe consciousness made the universe, something like that. I don't believe that.
Yeah. But I put a chart in the side chat. Why don't you take a look at it?
Yes. Let me see.
You have to scroll up a little bit.
Yes.
But it's a long chart. You don't have to you don't have to respond.
Okay, I will read this at some point.
Take a look at that. Tell me if you think that makes sense.
Okay, let me now try so pick it up second. Okay, now I said yes. Okay.
It's just a view in metaphysics about like what's fundamental within like the created order, right? And a lot of times people are physicalists. They'll say like physical things, but they kind of run into problems there. Describing things as physical, because then we're like, well, what does that really mean? And it seems like you could go deeper than that. And so one of the views is like information is the more fundamental thing.
Okay,
right?
That makes sense.
Yes. This maps on to like empirical, like scientific, like theories that we have, like quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
It also fits nicely with like theism and Christianity. So I tend to, I'm still learning about it. I used an AI bot to just make that. I just fed some information. All right, I got a phone call.
Put it this way: when it comes to your belief in this, like, your atheism. So when you have like your worldview, it has to be able to account not only for the ontology of the universe, but your epistemology as well. Under the Christian worldview, there is a God that is fundamental to all of reality and is the source and ground of all things that exist. He is also a mind that has an interest in knowing creation, knowing human beings, and having human beings know him, and growing and developing a relationship with his creation. Under your view, that wouldn't be true. At the most, you would get to some sort of immaterial or some sort of a non-mental, fundamental thing that doesn't have any sort of mental, commitments or anything like that would actually be able to let you relate to it, which would then undermine your ability to know reality as it is.
Okay, I understand this claim that without some kind of logos or some kind of, let's say, arbiter of what is true, therefore, in this world we cannot get truth or something like that. But the definition of truth is something that correlates to reality or conforts to reality, something like that. But and God can say things that are not true. For example, if God came to earth tomorrow and said and made the statement, an elephant can fit through a mouse hole. Is his statement true? What we need to
No,
do
his
to
statement would be true.
it,
But God does not reveal falsity to us. When he, like, for example, we go to the scriptures, all of that is true.
yeah, but wait just a moment, sir. How did you jump the gun and said that is necessarily false? But in the example I gave you, God made this statement. So in your scenario, that makes it true. Why you immediately understood that this cannot be true? Because
Well, I would say that it's not possible for God to make such a statement because God does not reveal false things to us.
okay, so let me continue this hypothesis and say what now God needs to do in order for his statement to be true, to make the mouse hole bigger in order for the elephant to fit, or to make the elephant smaller in order to fit to the mouse hole. So we see now God changing the environment in order for his statement to become true. That example demonstrates that truth is related to the environment, not to what God proclaims or says or arbiters or something like that. Isn't that right?
No, in
That's a
fact,
very good.
even in your example, you relied on God to be able to change the external world such that the statement would be true. Even in the example, God is still going to be sovereign over everything, and truth ultimately, the truth or falsity of that statement does depend on his creative act, right? You don't have that kind of thing in your worldview that you can know about, because you don't have this like under the Christian worldview, we do have this immediate mental access to God. God has made himself known, morally, through creation. He has made himself present to us, all people. You don't have that kind of thing under the naturalist, materialist, atheistic worldview.
Do you
You just
accept?
have your own mind and intuition starting from there, which you can't reason your way out of a wet paper bag starting from there. I'm sorry, it's just not possible.
The reason is another. Reason has to do. I believe that reason has to do with the order in our mind and the fact that the universe is rationally deductible. In other words, it has something, some continuity, and it has some
Why do you
consistency.
make that assumption? Why do you make that assumption?
I'm trying to explain how that things work in a naturalistic worldview, and so that is my hypothesis or my view. If we want me to argue about this view, yeah.
Socrates, what was your view?
Well,
You
I'm
were
asking
first.
why.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, dude. Sorry. I was looking at something else. Go.
I was going to ask, what? So you have this idea that the universe is rationally deducible, and you probably have a lot of other foundational assumptions about the universe. And the question I have for you is, why do you have those assumptions?
I have this is why do I have these assumptions? I have them because this is how I go up. Use logic and evidence to understand how the world works. So that is my conclusion of my thinking, of my rational process.
No,
So
but that.
notice you're starting with yourself, right? Someone else can have their own standard of coming to what they define truth to be, and they would come to a radically different conclusion than you would. So there is actually zero commonality between human beings under this view.
Yes. Okay.
You can actually establish.
Yes, but wait a moment. So you made an argument which is rational and logical, but that doesn't necessarily make it true. The same as my argument. If I make an argument that doesn't contradict logic in a direct way, as I did before, I didn't give any evidence in order to substantiate the truth of my argument. Now, what we need to do when we have two competing narratives or arguments, we need to give examples from reality, from the empirical world, from our senses, in order to support our argument and make it, make it sound. Because now we just made two valid arguments. So
Yeah. Well, so what was, but okay. What I'm trying to help you do is you're kind of trying to have your foot in both camps here. You're trying to say that you're start with your own independent reasoning, autonomous reasoning, but at the same time you want to make appeals to this like fundamental reality that you claim to have access to, but you're not actually starting with that fundamental reality. You're starting with your own mind. You're trying to have your cake and eat it too here, right?
Yes,
You have to what you have to do is you have to claim to know what is fundamental to reality. But
yes,
you're not making that claim.
yeah, I claim to. I'm just describing my belief. I don't claim that I have absolute certainty. I'm just describing what I believe, and I made um, an argument. Obviously, I haven't given any evidence to support my argument yet, but at least it can happen, guys. If I in a hypothetical world without God, how what I explain, how I come about to have objectivity. Like I can,
We can't.
yeah, but that is I'm giving you reasons why I can. Because if we assume, let's say it's not true, but if we assume in a hypothetical world that the universe is rationally deductible and the order in our mind reflects the ordered universe, there can be some kind of consistency that doesn't rely in a underlying fundamental mind. It can
Well,
it
Well,
can
it
be
relies on something.
you
Okay,
can
bro.
say that, but you have to give an argument for that. Like, that's easy to say, but things like order itself is a mental state. Okay, things like deduction and all the things you're appealing to are already insisting on a metaphysic that is mental in nature.
Right.
We're not going to let you have a free lunch here and just say, okay, after I have this miracle, now let me just deal with physics and just pretend as if physics is all we need. When physics, again, just like with the battery acid
example.
metaphor or
Yes.
whatever it was, yeah, is physical facts aren't going to tell you anything about the morals of that situation, which, by the way, it's the morals that cause that whole situation. So here you have a primary cause, the person shoulding themselves, for lack of a very, should I kill this old lady, has caused the scenario, which is a mental state causing the physical state. And so it's your task to give us an argument why order and rationale and deduction, all mental states, can be deduced from physical facts alone. Because that, I think, ultimately is where the atheist ends up.
Okay.
And so you're going to have to get us there using those physical facts. If you're not a physicalist and you have a different set of facts that can account for morality, give us that argument. But until then, our model makes the most sense.
Okay. So, what are the three states that can reality can exist generally? It can be nothing, or it couldn't be nothing. So nothing is something which sounds necessary or fundamental. Nothing. It can be order, something which is ordered, or it can be chaos. So this is the three states. But those three states is like the facts, the fundamental facts of reality. You can, okay. So there cannot be when we talk about the physical world outside of our minds. Okay, we have these three states. I cannot really give an argument why only these three states exist, because those are very fundamental. They exist because they exist. So something can be ordered, something cannot exist at all, can be nothing, or something can be chaotic in a sense. So I cannot possibly give an argument why these
You're a
things
motherfucker
exist.
bitch. You're a motherfucker bitch. You're a motherfucker
No,
bitch. You're a
I would
motherfucker
disagree
bitch.
with you there, Socrates. I would disagree with you there, Socrates, because order implies chaos. Because you can't have order unless there's a kind of non-order to judge it by. The same goes for chaos. There's no such thing as chaos unless there's a standard of order from which to judge that something is chaotic. And so, yeah, I just disagree on that premise. I think what you're trying to say is that, yeah, at bottom there's just going to be a circular argument, a tautology or something, to where you can't go any further. You can't
Yeah,
investigate because it's just this basal fact of reality. And what we would say is that that basal fact is mental. There's no good reason to think that it's physical.
okay. Yes, I get what you are saying. Can let me give you can we say that two things can be equal is something a fundamental fact of reality that is kind of like axiomatic or tautology, as you said, that that two things can be equal. But if we assume that two things can be equal, that might imply that when that happens, that implies that there is the first ordered thing. The first, imagine, guys, we see something chaotic that doesn't make sense, any pattern in front of us, and suddenly two things become equal. Immediately we start and we see the first simple order. Now our mind can recognize this pattern. Okay, so and what if the mind reflects the physical world and it's not the most fundamental thing? So we get what if that is the case?
So, Socrates,
Well, but at the end of the day, Socrates, you're just going to have to give us an argument, because what if pigs could fly? I mean, yeah, what if? But one of the reasons we actually, I mean, there are things that I say, for example, these are not original to me, but one reason why you can assume the mind is more fundamental than matter is because the mind is the only thing that can explain matter. Whereas matter, in principle, could never explain a mental state. As I mentioned earlier, with the battery acid, and should the person have killed the old lady, you could never know that from physical facts alone. Reality doesn't move in that direction. But reality does move in the direction of the mind making account of the physics. In other words, let me say that the mind, mental states, can explain physics. However, there are no physics that can explain the mind. Period. End of story. I mean, it's a fundamental cut in reality that physical facts are not mental facts, and they can't get you to a single mental fact, whereas mental facts can explain all of physics. Yes. And so this is why we say everything that the mind is more fundamental than matter, because one explains the other, whereas physics cannot explain the mind. So that's just a kind of window, a kind of little story to think about the fundamentality of mind.
Okay, that is
and also, one last thing, another thing that sort of evidences that the mind is more fundamental than matter is the fact that you cannot deny the mind and be within logic, because as soon as you deny your mind, you've affirmed your mind. However, you can deny physics and be still within logic. You can deny all physical facts and still not make a logical error. However, as soon as you try to deny your mind, you're in a contradiction. You're in a logical error.
Okay, so practically, without time, if you in order for the mind to be consistent, it presupposes time, causality, some kind of time that is linear and it goes forward. For example, if I want to make a sentence without the concept of time, which is a physical concept,
we accept that. Yeah, but there are some things that are not in time. So, for example, as you're reasoning, that's in time. But then there are certain things that happen, and even in physics, that are not in time. So, and that's been established. In fact, they've delivered Nobel Prizes because of this discovery, that there are things that violate this linear progression of time.
Yeah, I know. But
and so you're saying that and by the way, you're also begging the question and making an error here. You're assuming that time is a physical fact when it's not. Time is not a physical fact. So what your point is, I predict, is that as you're thinking and as your mind is working, it's presupposing temporality and time in a linear progression. And what I'm saying is, that's true, but time's not physical. So the mind is in time.
So Einstein said that time is physical in his equation.
Well, Einstein was a physicalist. He didn't know much about philosophy. I mean, all of
Okay.
these hard-nosed physicists, look, these are the last people you want to go to for philosophy, because there is no philosophy in just the quantitative facts of physics. There's no philosophy to be found there.
Okay,
And so when he says things that time is physical, he's making an error.
Okay, sir. Okay, I can relate to that, because some of the greatest questions metaphysics examine is the nature of time, and all these kind of things. So I can relate to this kind of thinking. Now let me ask you.
Can we point out the famous quote by Augustine, Saint Augustine, who said, "If you do not ask me what time is, I can tell you what it is." Or no, sorry, if you do not ask me what time is, I know what it is. But as soon as you ask me what time is, I don't know what it is. And you know what? Physicists would agree with that. Both physicists and philosophers agree. Not even physicists know what time is.
Okay, so let me make an important mental experiment.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll shut up now. Yeah, go for
it. Yes, sir. Let's say in this world, imagine, because as you said, that people get Nobel Prizes when they discover that in the quantum level, time is not linear. It's not okay. We have counterintuitive time. Time. Let's say we shrink in this world, where nothing our mind dictates, our Newtonian mind dictates, correlates with what's happening in the environment. Okay, so I will argue that in this environment we are indistinguishable from crazy people, because nothing we think and nothing we say correlates to an environment outside of us. If that is the case, that means that
Socrates, I wanted to ask you this earlier. What did you say truth was?
Truth is what corresponds to reality.
Okay, so that proposition, how does that proposition correspond to reality?
Because in the reality of the quantum level, we see that whatever we think rational doesn't correspond to the environment, and then we cannot distinguish ourselves from a crazy person.
No. I'm asking you to explain the proposition that you just stated, right? Which is, when I asked you what truth was, you said that which corresponds to reality, right?
Yes.
So let's just examine that proposition itself.
Okay.
Right? The proposition that what's true is what corresponds to reality.
Yes.
How does that proposition, how do you know that proposition corresponds to reality?
Okay.
In what sense does that
Yes.
Yeah. In what sense does that proposition correspond to reality?
Because so I will, although it's a very good question, and I obviously will not give a sufficient answer, but I will attempt.
I'm not trying to trap you or anything.
Okay, so if I am attempt to answer this question, is that we as humans, we want truth to have certain characteristics. Okay, so we want truth to work, for example. We want this is how we define truth as humans. We define truth the certain way, like we define what is an elephant or what is a banana. So certain things have certain definition because we want to communicate something. So, sir, when I want to communicate you a concept, and I say truth, that relates to your mind something that I'm trying to communicate. That doesn't okay. So we agree to this definition in order to be able to communicate. So this is what we mean.
So what you're doing is you're just presupposing that it's true, right?
Okay, so certain definitions, let's say, that exist in a Platonic sense, like in a they. Okay, so they exist by descriptions. How can I explain that? They correlate to a meaning. They just correlate to a meaning that we want to communicate. So when I say a banana, okay, you don't have to accept the word banana, but when I say the word banana, it means in your mind a specific fruit. Now, if I change the word and I say Murdoch's describing a banana, that doesn't mean that the meaning of the banana disappears. The concept of the banana still exists, but now you just change the word to describe this concept.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's just a social construct. Like we're just arbitrarily choosing that certain sequences of letters will represent, like,
exactly,
will
yes.
have certain meaning. So right. But how does this relate to like the question that I was asking about?
To
Like,
truth.
yeah.
Okay, so the same way that okay, in the simplicity.
You created a standard for what is true, right?
Yes, I create a standard. This is how
Okay,
we
so I'm
understand
asking
truth.
you to apply that standard to your standard, right? Like your standard is things, in order for them to be true, they have to correspond to reality. Now that's you're making a truth claim when you say that, right? So that truth claim, let's run it through like your standard. According to your standard, that proposition has to correspond to reality. So in what sense does that proposition correspond? What is it in reality? How does that proposition correspond to reality?
Okay.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on what he just said. So if you're saying that reality is that, or sorry, truth is that which corresponds to reality, then we're going to ask you, how do you know that? And you're going to say, because it corresponds to reality. But that's begging the question. So that's circular. And so we need to get beneath that. Now, this is where that basal foundational point, Socrates, you said, comes up, because this is the bottom. This is where you just have to throw your arms up and say, hey, man, at the level of the basal reality, things are circular. It is because it is just that way. And I think that's where you're stuck, Socrates.
Yeah.
The problem
I
is,
think that's right.
and this is where empiricism failed, right? Because they couldn't analyze their own basal assumption with their own razor, right? And there is, how do you empirically test empiricism?
Exactly.
You can't.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, you got to go. We're trying to get you to go deeper, Socrates.
No, I understand the point, and that's why I began saying that my answer will be like an attempt. It won't be satisfying, but let me.
No, that's a fair attempt. You're trying to appeal to like something pragmatic, right? To
Yes,
say like,
I'm just investigating now. How can that work? Although I accept that I'm not against the scenario that consciousness is the fundamental reality. That actually is a very strong, and in my opinion, is the strongest argument for God, to demonstrate that consciousness is fundamental to reality, is the most fundamental thing in reality, which that makes sense, and also makes sense in some physics experiments, like you mentioned, sir. Someone mentioned. The double slit experiment, or so physics might support that, and it might solve many problems. Okay, so I accept
that's
that
right.
as a
Math,
good hypothesis. Yes.
Math and stuff, right?
Yes. Okay, so that is a good hypothesis. The only problem with this assumption is that, okay, consciousness is always a product of something physical, but how can you have consciousness? It's like magic in my ears, consciousness, without the physical dimension.
Man. You can't. Wait a minute. You just said something that's not verifiable. You just said it's always the product of the physical. Like, we just totally reject that. You could just as easily say the physical is always the product of the mind.
Okay, so let me give you an example. So, in order for something to exist, it necessarily must have some kind of essence. Do you agree with this statement?
Of course. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, but the moment something has some kind of essence, it necessarily becomes like an exotic form of physical, let's say, because okay. So, what is the essence of of consciousness? It's just ideas in the flying, like in the sky, just ideas flying. What is the hard essence of this this thing of consciousness.
Well, that's like asking what is Catholicism in grams. I mean, it's just the wrong question. It's just like asking where is the married bachelor. I mean, there is no physical quantity of a mental state. There are only physical quantities of physical states, such as neurons. So if you ask me about neurons and neuroscience, I'll give you all the quantities you want. I'll give you electricity, chemistry. We'll get into biology, all kinds of stuff, and you get physics. Now, when you ask me for the physical quantity of my opinion, or whether or not I should do something, that approach falls to the side. It's impossible.
Yeah, but you see where I'm coming from. In my mind,
I do, and that's why I tried to point you, because in my view, information at its core is not something physical, right? So if you're looking for just some more detailed way of how consciousness could be understood, you could understand it as something that arises from some sort of informational state, right? But that's not physical, right? And now you're left wondering, like, or asking, like, well, what explains the information?
yes, but
There's information like everywhere, like in the universe, right?
yes, okay.
So God can explain that. Like, instead of just saying it's brute, which all of these atheistic explanations always have to end up with something brute. No matter what it is that they try to ground things in, it's just, and it ends up, they just end up saying we're at the natural, like we're at the beginning of the causal, the causal order begins here, and why? It's because it's brute, right?
Well,
There can't.
Do you accept
Socrates,
that God exists outside of our mind? It's something. God exists outside
God
of
is
mind.
independent of us. He's independent of us. Yeah.
Yes, but if guys, God, in order to actually exist, must exist outside of our mind, because I can now imagine.
You don't even know what mind is.
The mind is what we communicate. More or less, we all can communicate what that is.
yeah, but see, Socrates, we're all over the map right now. So Socrates, remember, you just said that if there's a mental concept, at the end of the day, it's going to manifest as a physical thing. I can't remember the word you used, but it's going to manifest as a physical thing.
Yes.
That's a very radical statement. And here's why. Because what it means to be a physical thing means you can literally measure it with a scientific device. And so, and what is that scientific device? They're tape measures, they're microscopes, telescopes, there are all kinds of them. But regardless of what they are, they can see the object and measure it. They can give you centimeters, seconds, they can give you grams. That's what you're going to have to do if you want to make thoughts physical things. Yeah. This is just basic physics. So most people who are atheists don't know even what it means to be physical. And so when you start saying things that minds are physical and mental thoughts are physical, you've got a uphill stream to battle, because now we're going to ask you for the quantitative parameters of a thought.
Okay.
And it's going to be like trying to give me the grams of Catholicism in grams, Buddhism in centimeters. It's going to be impossible.
Let me make a radical statement, and then I will give evidence for this statement. Whatever exists can be potentially measured. So now I know what I said is very radical and statement. And now let me give an example that supports this statement. What was wait just a moment, sir. I kind of.
You said whatever exists can be potentially measured.
Yes, whatever exists can be potentially measured. But now I kind of forgot what I wanted to say. Give me just a second to recall the example. I wanted to say one example that kind of demonstrates that.
Take your time.
Yes.
You'll be there a while.
And my example was, let's say I imagine now in my mind a dragon with butterfly wings. Okay, this mental object exists in our mind the same way like God might exist in our mind, but you gentlemen will agree that unless something exists outside of our mind in some kind of reality, is not doesn't really exist. So, for example, if I say that God exists only in my mind, that doesn't. So we have to. That doesn't mean that you will agree that this type of God is not sufficient that He exists. So you also claim that God exists outside of my mind. So now what I did is I demonstrated two types of reality: a hard reality with capital R, let's say, and another type of reality which is a mental reality. Now, if we assume that something that exists only in my mind, it doesn't really exist, that supports the statement I said that something that exists must be potentially, even in an exotic way, be measured in some way.
Well, no, wait. This is where, again, when you start saying things like minds, mental thoughts are physical, again, when you're talking about measurement, we're talking about the measurement of the physical sciences. And this is what Wolfgang Smith writes about when he says these are called scientific devices, scientific apparatuses. The scientific apparatus, and that's why I named them. I named about 4 of them. So when you say they can be measurable in some way, well, I don't care what way you're using. It has to be physically measurable. If a thought is physical, in principle, it must be measurable using a scientific device like a tape measure or a microscope, a telescope. And if now you can measure it with your opinions all you want, and you can even trade your opinions with other people, and I'll give you my opinion about the dragon that you're imagining. That's not a scientific measurement, okay? That you're not doing science, physical science.
But what I did now, sir, I made a distinguish between hard reality and mental reality, and I said that a mental reality doesn't really exist, and I gave you the reason why I think that, because not even you, sir, would have submit that a God that exists only in my mind.
I agree with that. I agreed with that, but here's where that falls apart. What you're saying is that the dragon with wings doesn't, the hallucination or the imagination of the dragon with wings is not manifest outside of my mind with a corporeal body in space. And it's not an actual dragon. And you're right. However, it does still establish, and in fact gives evidence for our side, it establishes that your mind is real. Because without the mind, there could be no imagination of a dragon. Now, we all accept that the dragon's a hallucination. We accept the dragon is an imagination. But all this does is just further verify our position that what's not the illusion is your mind. In fact, the mind is the only thing that can't be an illusion, because illusions themselves assume mind, because there is no illusion outside of a mind. So still, we're at the fundamentality of the mind, and there's no way around.
But do you accept a duality in God, that or God is just pure mind?
Well, here's why I disagree with that, because we have lots of historical and textual and other evidences and spiritual and personal evidence of this external being, God. We don't have the same evidence for unicorns and Santa Claus and things like this. So no, they're not on the same footing.
Yes, okay, but if you accept that God is not just a mental construct, he exists somewhere in a metaphysical reality, let's say, because then the next question comes is, okay, so what is the fundamental reality of God? Is the mental construct or his existence in the metaphysical reality? And you will obviously say his existence in the metaphysical reality. Then I come and say, in order for something to exist in some kind of reality, then we can potentially measure that in order to have meaning that this thing exists. It's not okay. We can. What I'm trying to say, sir. Okay, I cannot measure love in my mind, but love is. But no one of you will say that love is a hard reality. Like
Well, we believe, remember, we believe the mental states are the most concrete realities. Remember, the mind cannot be denied, because when you deny the mind, you affirm it, you prove the mind. The physical world can be denied. You can say it doesn't exist. You can say you're in a dream, and in fact, there are times where you are in a dream and you don't know. But that world has been totally hallucination, and that physical world in a dream has been a hallucination. So you can easily deny the physical world. You can never deny the mind. So we believe that mental states are more concrete than physical states. In fact, there are things that only are derivable from the mind that do not perish, that are above time itself. For example, a geometric truth is not in space, it's not in time, it does not perish, it does not change, and it applies to every possible world and scenario you could imagine. And so it's in a sense above time itself. It's certainly far above space.
But wait
And yet
just a
we
moment.
have access. We have access to that. Why? Through the mind. And so we believe that these things, and that goes for moral truths as well. It doesn't matter what world you're in, it's always going to be wrong to kick a little puppy just for fun and torture a little innocent animal just for fun. Like, that's never going to be good. So anyway, what I'm saying here is that mental states are more concrete. Moral truths, mathematical truths.
Okay,
Yeah.
I understand. But sometimes what we do, in fact, to see whether our mental state is true. Okay, so I can imagine things that are, let's say, I claim that 1 + 1 = 5. What verifies my mental object is hard reality. So I go and test and see what I'm thinking is not true. So although there is an order in our mind, and that implies that there are certain things that are logical, but if you exclude some fundamental things like the law of non-contradiction, or some kind of logical absolutes, or the claim that I think, therefore I am, if you exclude these type of things, that logic alone can be certain about their truth. For all the rest, we need some kind of verification from the outside, the hard world, in order to claim that these things are true.
Well,
Yeah, and about the example with the puppy, we have the experience that if I hit a puppy, that brings suffering, and suffering, I can mirror, feel empathy with the suffering, and that's why it's bad. So I don't see that how the statement precedes the actual reality of the puppy being having suffering and.
well,
So,
it's because it's objective, in the sense that it doesn't matter whether or not you think it's wrong, or it's going to be wrong even if you think it's right. So
yeah,
yeah, there's
yeah,
so that's what makes it objective and moral truth, because it's independent of human minds. So again, it could be 100% of the population could tell you that it's okay and good to do, and they may all love it. That doesn't make it true. That doesn't make it good. And so, yeah, moral truths don't care about how your opinions. But anyway, let's see what else. No, the fact of the matter is that there are physical facts, and then there are mental facts. Mental facts are transcendent. They're above physical facts, but they're related. They're absolutely related. We are in a corporeal world. And if you look at my profile photo, that's the connection there. From the timeless to time, which is the line, to the circle, which is space, the body. And this is reflected in the cosmos, it's reflected in human beings, and it's all interconnected. The problem with atheism, most of atheists think there's only one level, which is the physical, and it's absurd. I mean, it is probably the most absurd idea in philosophy. And as Bernardo Kastrup says, the philosophers and scientists of the future will look back at this time in philosophical history and bury their face in the palm of their hand in shame that people actually used to say things like, your mind is just a physical being. that all there exists is physics. Morality is not really true. And dare I say, God doesn't exist. I think that will be the most ridiculed idea that could be. But anyway, I don't think we're going to get anywhere here. You're just going to have to give us a strong argument where you can deduce mental facts from physical facts. And if you can't do that using physics and physical quantities, then there's just no where we can go here. Now, if you ask me to make an account for physical facts using my mind, I'll say that's easy. In fact, that's the only thing I can do. I have to do that. So the argument's on up to you. Now, and one last thing, Socrates. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but Plato said you cannot get philosophy from reading. And the Christian Bible hints toward, or maybe even explicitly says as much, that you have to do these things in order to really see these things and to be a spiritual person. And if you're a physicalist atheist, you're just never going to make yourself available to that world. And so everything then will just be these hard, cold, black and white facts and physics, and you'll never be, that's where you'll be stuck forever. And so you have to kind of get out of that framing, and because some things must be felt and seen, they can't be taught or described.
The hard problem of consciousness, the duality we have.
Well, that's one. Yeah, that's one. It will never be solved on physics. And so the hard problem is only a problem if your beginning assumption is that everything is physical. Once that's your beginning assumption, you've just created the hard problem of consciousness that can never be solved in principle. You've just invented an insoluble problem called the hard problem, because you made the mistake, and I don't mean you personally, but because we make the mistake of assuming everything's physical, we've just created this monster called the hard problem. And then how they try to fix it? They try to solve it with more physics, more numbers. It's just going even further away from what it is, from what consciousness is. When you deliver yourself from this fantasy, this radical notion that the only thing that exists is the physical, then the hard problem dissolves in an instant. Wolfgang Smith points this out. Bernardo Kastrup points this out. All of these problems that are insoluble on physics go away when you divorce yourself from this bad idea of physicalism.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we believe the physical is not primary is, like, if you take somebody like Ed Witten, right? He's considered like the greatest mind in science since Einstein. He says that if in whatever universe you find yourself in, say there were trillions of universes, he said you'll always find that calculus exists, right? So calculus isn't invented, calculus is discovered, kind of like the laws of logic. And so wherever you have material worlds arising, that is physical worlds, you have something that transcends the physical, that is like calculus and the laws of logic that are discovered. And so if you don't believe that there's like an ontology that transcends the physical, that brings about the laws of logic in calculus, then you must believe that wherever physical worlds arise, they always bring about the laws of logic and like calculus, right, which are abstract. And so they always bring with them some potential for the abstract, which is like mystery of mysteries, right? But we don't hold to that. We hold that the reason that all universes that are physical would have calculus and the laws of logic, which are conceptual, is that there's an ontology above the physical in which calculus and logic exist. And this is extended into physical worlds through this like intelligent mind. So prior to the physical, where does logic in like calculus, for example, have its location? And that would be within a mind, because it can't be physical. And so we would say that it's impossible for every possible physical universe to just somehow always bring about calculus and logic at least in potential, so that if a mind arises, it could have it like in abstracts. But we hold that again, the reason that all possible worlds have calculus and logic is because, again, there is a mind above physical things that in all possible worlds would put like calculus and logic into it.
The only last thing I will say is that in my assumption, and I know that most atheists believe in a kind of scientism, in other words, or everything is physical in a hard sense, but I will say that there is a distinction between the supernatural and the immaterial. I believe that the immaterial is part of the natural world, in a sense, the immaterial. So I can
The immaterial or the material?
the immaterial. I say that there is a distinction between the supernatural, something which is above nature, and just the immaterial, which is inside nature, is part of the physical world, but it's just a product of our brain, let's say, but it's still part of the natural world. It's not supernatural. The material are not supernatural. This is the only point I will make.
Well, yeah, but then you have that burden of showing how material can bring about immaterial.
Right. Well,
Right.
that's kind of the issue.
And why the immaterial in all universes must acknowledge the laws of logic and like calculus. So it makes more sense to say that there's something that in which calculus and logic are a part of, that's transcendent, that is putting this into material worlds, right, than just saying for some reason, we don't know, for some mystery, all material worlds bring about logic and calculus when minds arise that then bring about immaterial realities.
Well, the other thing is that even if you were to say that, obviously the natural world, if we're saying that they're a part of the natural world in some sense, but the natural world is composed of time, space, energy, and matter. So when we're talking about the ontology of like mathematics or the laws of logic, these things that are clearly mind independent, but what's their ontology? Are they time? Are they made of space? Are they made of matter? Are they made of energy? They're not material. They're not. Are they made of energy? Are they, it seems to me to be evident that these things, despite being mind not dependent on the human mind, mathematics and laws of logic are not also part of the natural world.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, and so Socrates, what the atheist seems to often do is redefine reality so that it fits within their narrow view. So now you can say things like the immaterial is natural and stuff like this, when in fact under physicalism, in order for something to exist, it has to be physical, and in terms of physics, that's pretty much always a material, some kind of material. You don't get mass and charge and amplitude and frequency without material, right? So, and that's all the physical is. And so you'll find yourself constantly having to goalpost shift to squeeze these ideas into a worldview. But under an investigation, they really do come apart pretty quickly. All you need to do is run into somebody who can kind of put things in perspective, so that we don't allow the physicalist, an atheist in this room. We don't allow them to get away with those redefinings of reality.
And I don't even think the material world exists in the way that materialists do. I think that what they think actually exists, or what they're saying actually exists, doesn't exist. It's just measurements around metaphysical reality. So I'd say, all reality is metaphysical, but what they try to do is reduce the metaphysical to some kind of actual like physical thing, but it's not even the case.
Yeah, that's Wolfgang Smith's position. He talks about that you will never find a physical object. It's just because as soon as you think you've got one, it's going to have aspects about itself that could never be described in physics. So, it could be a simple speck of dust. There's going to be a color, there's going to be something there that physics has nothing to say about. Yeah. And so, yes, physics at bottom is just there, and at its top, physics at its highest is just a description of an ontology. And that's why Wolfgang's book, his latest book, is called Physics, a Quest a science in quest of an ontology. Well, it'll never get there. Physics isn't even ontological, man.
And so what they
the same.
Oh, good. Yeah, but what they try to do is they try to reduce everything to the material, where I'm an immaterialist. I think they got it ass backwards. Like, there is truly no material things. But so what you're doing is you're taking something that's immaterial, you're putting measurements around it, and then saying that thing is material.
Yeah,
But the illusion is the material.
Yeah,
But
that's the map for the territory mistake,
Yeah.
right? Where they have this paper map and say that's the real mountain, and they're just ignoring the big beautiful green vista out there. That's the real mountain. Yeah, exactly. The map for the territory. Now, so then the atheist will snarkingly ask, okay, well then what is this fucking thing that I'm kicking right now that's not in my body? That's clearly immaterial. And well, Wolfgang Smith solved that problem. He said, no, that's a corporeal. That's an embodied entity with qualities that physics has nothing to say about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we do have a term for that. Thank God for Wolfgang. That these objects that are outside of our mind, that are in space, standing on the floor, they're corporeal. They're embodied, and they truly exist. And you can make them beautiful or ugly, whatever you want to do with it. I always talk about building a chair or recliner, but that chair or recliner doesn't even exist without something immaterial, which is the mind. And then like you said, the chair itself ultimately isn't material either. It's corporeal. The matter aspect of that chair is going to reduce to just descriptions in physics. That's the material world, that physical world. But yeah.
Now, was Wolfgang an immaterialist or not?
Yes.
Oh,
for sure. He said there's no such thing as a physical object.